The train came into Harland Creek on a Tuesday in October, when the cottonwoods along the creek bank had gone yellow and the wind carried the first real edge of winter down from the northern slopes. It arrived 20 minutes late, as it usually did, and the platform was not empty when it pulled in. A man waited near the far end, apart from the others, watching the windows as the cars slowed past him. He was 34 years old. He stood with his hands in his coat pockets and his hat brim level, and he did not shift his weight while he waited. The town bank bore his family's name on a painted board above the door. He had run it alone for 6 years. The platform filled briefly. A merchant with crates, two cowboys heading back to a ranch north of town, a woman with a child who ran to meet her husband before the car had fully stopped. Then the crowd thinned, and she was still standing there. She had come off the last car with a single bag, a dark wool traveling dress, and nothing else that he could see. She set the bag down at her feet and stood with her chin level, looking at the street that ran off the far end of the platform, at the general store, and the livery, and the low buildings of Harlan Creek stretching away from the rail line in both directions. She looked at it the way a person looks at a map they have already memorized, but are now confirming is accurate. He crossed the platform. He told her his name, the name of the bank, that he had received the letter from the agency in Edinburgh. She looked at him directly. Her eyes were a pale gray-green, and they did not waver. She gave her own name in return, short, plain, and said that the crossing had taken longer than the agency had estimated. He asked if she had eaten. She said not since morning. He picked up her bag without asking. She allowed it, which told him something. They walked off the platform together and down the main street toward the diner at the corner of Front and Callaway, and two women in front of the dry goods store watched them pass with the particular attention that Harlan Creek reserved for things it had not decided about yet. At the diner, he ordered coffee for both of them before she had opened her menu. He noticed her register it, a small tightening at the corner of her mouth, but she did not say anything. She ordered soup. He ordered nothing. While she ate, he laid out the arrangement in plain terms. The house needed managing. His daughter was 4 years old. The agency had confirmed her qualifications: room and board, a wage, and the contract terms he had already mailed to Edinburgh. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she set her spoon down and looked at him. She asked to see the house first. He said that was fair. They walked the 4 blocks from the diner in silence. The evening had cooled, and the smell of wood smoke was coming from somewhere up the hill. She carried nothing. He still had her bag over his shoulder, and she walked with, her hands loose at her sides, looking at the town as it looked back at her. A man on the hardware store steps nodded at him. He nodded back. She did not look away from the street ahead. The house was at the end of Birch Street, set back from the road by a short path of packed dirt, white clapboard, a covered porch running the width of the front, one upstairs window with a light in it. The girl was still awake, which meant Mrs. Hadley had stayed late. He noticed her take it in. The loose hinge on the gate, the porch rail he had not yet replaced, the geranium that someone had put in a tin can by the front step and left to go dry. She stepped onto the porch, and he unlocked the door. Inside was plain and clean. A sitting room with a wood stove already laid but not lit. A kitchen visible through the doorway, a cast-iron range, a table with 4 chairs, a window above the sink looking out toward the dark shape of the hill. A staircase on the left. He set her bag down near the door and let her move through it on her own terms. She went to the kitchen first. She checked the range, opened the firebox, saw the condition of it, closed it again. She ran one finger along the edge of the work table. She opened the pantry, looked at what was there, and closed it without comment. Then she went to the window and stood for a moment with her hands resting on the edge of the sink, looking out at nothing. He stayed in the doorway. She turned and looked at the sitting room. She looked at the staircase. She looked at him. She asked where the child slept. He said upstairs. Second door. She crossed to the staircase and went up. He did not follow. He heard the floorboards shift, her weight, then a pause, then Mrs. Hadley's low and a child's murmur in response. A minute passed, maybe two, then her footsteps coming back down. She came to the bottom of the stairs and stood. She said the girl's room needed a curtain. The window faced east, and in summer it would wake her too early. She said the pantry was short on oats, and the kitchen would need a proper ash bucket before she could keep the range clean. She said the sitting room was fine. Then she said she would take the position. He said, "Good." She nodded once and looked at her bag by the door, as though she was already calculating what morning would require, which, he would learn, was very nearly always how she stood. She was up before him the next morning. He came downstairs at first light, and the range was already going. The ash bucket sitting outside the back door. She had found one somewhere, or made do with something, and the kitchen smelled of oats and wood smoke. She was standing at the counter with her back to him, working. He said nothing. She said nothing. He took his coat from the hook and went out to see to the horses. When he came back, she had set a bowl on the table and a cup beside it. No saucer. Steam rising. He sat and ate, and she moved around the kitchen without looking at him, opening the pantry, closing it, writing something in small letters on a scrap of paper she kept folded in her apron pocket. He watched her fold the paper back and return it to her pocket. He asked if she had slept. She said well enough. He said the mattress in that room was older than the house probably deserved, and she said it was fine. That was all. He left for the bank at 7:30. She was already measuring flour when the door closed behind him. The child came downstairs at 8, which he had told her, and she had found the bowl he had told her about, and the spoon, and the girl stood in the kitchen doorway, with bare feet, and looked at her without speaking. She looked back. She did not smile immediately, which, later, she would think had been the right thing. Children knew when a smile was a performance, and this girl had the steady eyes of someone who had learned to tell the difference. She asked if she liked her oats with cream or without. The girl said without, but with a little salt. She said that was how she took hers too, which was true. The girl came in and sat at the table. They ate together without much talking. The girl watched her the way children watched things they were not sure about yet, carefully, from the side. Once she asked what her apron was made of, and she said linen, and the girl nodded as though this confirmed something she had already suspected. After breakfast, she showed the girl where the broom was kept, and the girl swept the back step without being asked twice. She noticed that. He came home at 6:30 to find supper on the table and the sitting room tidied and a curtain, something white, folded neatly over the back of the chair, waiting to be put up in the girl's room. He did not know where she had gotten it. He did not ask. The girl was at the table doing her letters with a pencil that needed sharpening. She was already in the kitchen. He stood in the hall for a moment. The house sounded different than it had yesterday, though he could not have said exactly how. He sharpened the girl's pencil before he sat down. She heard the small scrape of the knife from where she stood at the stove and did not look up. He did it without comment, set it back beside the paper, and pulled out his chair. The soup was barley and salt pork. Simple. She had found both in the larder and not asked permission. He looked at the bowl for a moment before picking up his spoon. She sat across from him, and the girl sat between them, and that was how it was. He asked the girl what she had learned. The girl said her letters. He asked which ones. The girl said all of them, with a confidence that was not quite accurate. He did not correct her. He looked at the bowl again, and she thought she saw something move through his expression. Something brief and quiet, like a door opening onto a room too fast to see inside, then closing. After supper, he cleared the bowls himself. She had not expected that. She was washing up when he came through with his coat still on. He set something on the counter beside her, a small paper package, the kind tied with string from the general store. He did not explain it. He went back out to the hall, and she heard him hang his coat. Inside the paper were 2 candles, good ones, not tallow. the pressed kind that burned clean and long. She set them on the windowsill above the basin and did not mention them. The days arranged themselves with a quietness she had not been prepared for. She rose before him. She had the fire going and the kettle on before his boots came down the stairs. He passed through to the back door without speaking, and she did not speak either, and by the time he came back in the tea was poured and sitting. The girl left for school at 8:30. She walked her to the end of the street, not because she had been asked to, but because the road curved, and she did not like the thought of the girl out of sight before the bend. He watched from the doorway once, just once, that she knew of. The curtain went up in the girl's room on the third morning. She stood on the chair to do it and had the thing rehung before he came down. When the girl saw it, she touched the hem without saying anything, the way children touched things they did not want to admit they liked. She found his ledger on the table that afternoon, open to a column of figures that did not balance. She could see where the error was. A transposition, nothing more. She closed it without touching the numbers and put it back exactly as it had been. She stood there a moment with her hand still on the cover. Then she went and started on the bread. The bread took 2 hours. She had found the flour in the wrong tin. Someone had switched them, or perhaps they had always been that way. And the yeast was older than she would have liked, but she worked with what was there. The kitchen smelled of it by midday. Warm and close and particular in the way that bread smell is particular, different from any other warmth a room can hold. He came in at noon and stopped just inside the doorway. He did not say anything about the smell. He crossed to the basin, washed his hands, and sat at the table with the same economy of motion she had come to recognize. Nothing wasted, nothing announced. She cut 2 slices and set one in front of him without being asked. He looked at it for a moment. Then he ate. She sat across from him with her own slice and her tea, and they ate without talking. The clock on the mantel counted the silence in small, even measures. When he was finished, he stood and pushed the chair back and said, "The bread is good." 3 words, flat and plain, and not looking at her when he said them. She said, "The yeast was old." He nodded once and went back through the hall door. She sat there with her cup going cold and did not smile exactly. But something in her shoulders came down a degree. The girl came home at 2:30 with mud on her hem and a paper folded in her fist. She held it out without preamble. A sum she had gotten wrong, the teacher's mark red and final at the top. She watched the girl's face while she looked at it. Not shame, something quieter than shame, like she had already decided what the paper meant about her, and was waiting to see if it would be confirmed. She took the paper, sat the girl down at the table, worked through it with her from the beginning, not correcting, just asking questions, letting the girl find where the thinking had gone sideways. The girl's face changed as they worked. By the end, she had the right answer, and she knew how she had gotten it. She folded the paper and set it back in front of her. The girl stared at it. Then she said, "He never has time for sums." She did not answer that directly. She said, "You have time before supper. Do the next 3 problems while it's still clear." The girl opened her school book without argument. She stood and went back to the stove. The pot wanted watching. Outside the window, the street was going gray, with the early dusk that came in October, the light thinning fast over the rooftops. She heard the front door open at 5:30, the familiar weight of his step in the hall, the pause before he came through. The girl looked up from her book. He looked at the two of them at the table, together. He said nothing. He went to hang up his coat. Supper was quiet the way it had been since the first week. Not uncomfortable, just economical. She set the pot on the table, the bread beside it, and they sat down the way they always did now, the girl between them. The window going dark behind the curtain she had rehung 3 weeks ago so it closed properly. He ate. He asked the girl about her day in the short, careful way he asked things. One question, then he listened. The girl told him about the spelling test, about a boy who had knocked over the ink pot, about Miss Harland's gray cat that slept on the window ledge. He nodded. He did not reach for more bread until she had taken what she wanted. After a while, the girl said, "She helped me with my sums." He looked up from his bowl, not at the girl, at her. She kept her eyes on her supper. He said, "Did she?" The girl said yes and explained about the problem with the fractions, about how she had done it wrong twice and not understood why. She talked with the easy fluency children have when they do not yet know that some information is worth withholding. He listened. When the girl finished, he looked down at his bowl again. He said, "Good, that was all. One word." But he said it the way a man says a thing he means, without decoration, and she heard it. She cleared the table. The girl took her school book to bed early because the next morning was a long walk, and she had learned by now to go without argument. She said good night to him first, then came and pressed her cheek briefly against her arm, a habit that had grown up in the last few weeks without announcement, and went down the hall. The house was quiet. She washed the bowls. He stayed at the table with his ledger, the way he did most evenings, the lamp pulled close, his pen moving in that steady, unhurried script she had seen on the papers she sometimes collected from the front step. She had learned the rhythm of these evenings. He worked until the lamp needed trimming. Then he closed the ledger. Tonight he closed it earlier than usual. She heard the cover come down. Heard him sit back. She did not turn around. He said, "She doesn't take to people easily." She set a bowl on the shelf. He said, "She hasn't since her mother." She turned then. He was not looking at her. He was looking at the closed ledger, his hand flat on the cover, the lamp throwing his face half into shadow. She did not say anything. There was nothing to say that would not cost more than the moment could hold. She took the lamp from the counter and set it on the table closer to him so the light was better. Then she went back to the washing. The next morning she found a pair of boots outside the kitchen door, not his, smaller. A child's boots, the leather cracked along the toe box, the left sole pulling away from the upper at the heel. They had been set there neatly, side by side, toes pointing toward the house. She picked them up and turned them over. The separation at the heel was clean, not rot, just dry, the kind of thing that could be fixed. She brought them inside and set them on the counter. He came through at 6:30 the way he always did, coat already on, hat in his hand. He stopped when he saw the boots. She said, "They need resoling. I can take them to the cobbler, or you can tell me where he keeps his kit." He looked at her for a moment. Then he crossed to the cabinet beside the back stairs, the low one she had assumed, held lamp oil, and opened it. There was a small wooden box inside with a tack hammer and a bone folder and a spool of waxed thread and a piece of last iron, dull and heavy, shaped like a foot. He set the box on the counter next to the boots. He said, "There's a jar of contact cement on the bottom shelf. The nails are loose in the corner of the box." Then he put on his hat and went out. She worked on the boots after breakfast, after the girl had gone upstairs. The sole came off cleanly once she worked the putty knife under it, and she let the leather breathe while she mixed the cement. The last iron was heavier than she expected. She balanced it against her hip to hold the boot steady while she worked. Outside the window, the morning was flat and gray, the kind of day that never quite decided what it wanted to be. She was pressing the sole back into place, holding it firm with both hands, when she heard the girl on the stairs. Not coming down, just stopped partway, the way she sometimes did, sitting on the fourth step where the riser was wide enough to be comfortable. She had noticed this habit 2 weeks ago. The girl would sit there sometimes in the mornings with a book, or without one, in the place where she could hear the kitchen without being in it. She kept working. The cement needed pressure and time, and she gave it both, her palms flat against the leather, her eyes on the window. She could feel the girl watching. She did not look up. After a while, the girl said, "Those are mine," she said. "I know." A pause then. "The other one leaks when it rains." She set the finished boot down and reached for the second one. She said, "Show me where." The step creaked. Then small feet appeared at the edge of the kitchen floor. The girl pointed to the toe seam, a small finger, nail bitten to the quick. pressing against the inner welt where the stitching had begun to separate. She could feel the gap herself when she pressed there, not wide, but enough to let water through. She turned the boot in her hands, tipping it toward the light. The stitching had held everywhere else. Just the one place where the thread had worn through, the leather on either side still good and supple. She set it down on the table and went to the tin where she kept the waxed thread. The girl was still standing at the edge of the kitchen, not quite in. Her socks had a hole at the left heel, she said. Sit down if you want. The girl sat, not at the far end of the table where she usually placed herself at meals, but closer, 2 chairs away. She watched the way a child watches someone doing something with their hands, quiet and particular. She threaded the needle without hurry. She had done this enough times that her hands did not need instruction. The boot was simple work. 2 passes of thread, a knot pulled tight below the surface, a little beeswax drawn over the whole seam to seal it. She focused on keeping her stitches even, the girl said. Where did you learn that? She said. My mother. She had a shop. A pause. The girl said. In Scotland. She said yes. She pulled the thread through and felt the seam draw together clean. Outside, the flat grade had decided to become rain after all, a slow, quiet kind of rain that made no noise against the glass. She said, these will hold now. The girl looked at the boots on the table. Both of them, sitting heel to heel. She did not reach for them right away. She said, he used to do that. She kept her eyes on the work, set the needle down carefully. The girl said, fix things. She said it matter-of-factly, the way children sometimes deliver the heaviest things, without knowing the weight. He used to have a workbench in the second barn. Before. She understood before to be doing a great deal of work in that sentence. She did not ask what it meant. She smoothed her thumb along the repaired seam and felt the thread sitting flush even. After a moment she picked up the boots and set them on the floor in front of the girl's feet, sole down, side by side, she said. They should dry an hour before you wear them. The girl looked down at them. Something moved across her face that she could not name and did not try to. Then she tucked her feet underneath herself on the chair, the way children do when they have decided to stay a while, and she said, do you have more thread? Because the other ones need it too. She worked through the afternoon. The girl brought 4 more items from somewhere in the house. A wool vest with a split seam at the shoulder, a pair of boys' trousers with the knee worn through, a small apron with the tie torn clean off, and a man's shirt collar that had been folded and refolded until the fold itself had frayed. She laid them one at a time on the edge of the table like offerings, watching to see what would happen to each one. She threaded a new needle without comment and worked through them in order. The girl did not leave. She found a low stool near the window and sat on it with her arms wrapped around her knees, watching the way children watch a skilled thing being done. Not restless, not bored, entirely absorbed. Once she asked what a particular stitch was called. She told her. Blanket stitch. The girl repeated it softly, testing the weight of the word. Once she reached the shirt collar, she paused. The fraying was not from use. Someone had touched the same fold repeatedly over a long time. She recognized that kind of wear. She repaired it and set it down. Outside, the late afternoon light had gone from gold to flat. She could hear the stove settling in the kitchen, the small metallic tick of cooling metal. Somewhere in the back of the house a door opened and then closed. One quiet sound, and then nothing. The girl heard it too. She uncurled from the stool. She watched her gather the finished items carefully, one on top of the other, and hold them against her chest with both arms. The boots had been sitting sole down near the stove for the past hour. She reached down and picked them up by the heels, tucking them under one arm. She said, tell him the collar is done. The girl looked at her. There was a pause, not hesitation, just the small gap of a child deciding something. She said, he knows you're here. It was not delivered as a surprise. It was delivered the way she had said everything all afternoon, plainly without ornament, as simple fact. The way a child passes along information they do not yet understand the full weight of but sense is important. She held the girl's gaze for a moment. Then she looked back down at the table, at the scraps of thread and the folded piece of beeswax and the two needles she had set heel to heel when she started. She straightened them slightly, the way hands find something to do when the mind needs a moment. The girl shifted the stack of mended things against her chest. She said, "I'll tell him about the collar," and she walked out. She stood at the table for a moment after the girl left. The needles were already straight. She straightened them again anyway. Then she gathered the thread scraps into her palm and carried them to the small waste tin near the window, and set the beeswax on top of the sewing basket, and folded the cloth she had been using as a work surface. Each thing in its place. The motions were familiar, and she let them be familiar. Let her hands work through the sequence without asking anything more of herself. The boots were still tucked under her arm. She set them on the table, looked at them. Plain leather, resoled once by someone who knew what they were doing, the left heel worn slightly more than the right. She had noticed that the first time she picked them up, the same way she noticed the collar, where the wear was, what it meant about how a person moved through the world. She turned them over now and set them sole down, the way she had found them by the stove. Outside, a cart passed on the road. The sound of it came in through the thin wall and went. She did not know what "He knows you're here" was meant to do, whether the girl had intended something by it, or whether it was simply the truth and children did not carry truth with the same weight adults did not understand that some facts landed differently depending on the hour they were set in. She picked up the boots again. The collar was done. That was all. She had said what she came to say, she had left word, and now she would go back through town the way she came, and in the morning there would be other work, and the week would continue. The room was very quiet. She had been in many quiet rooms. She was not afraid of them. But this one had a quality she could not put a name to. Not emptiness, not exactly. More like something suspended. The way air feels just before weather changes, and the birds have already gone still. She heard the step on the porch, not the loose one, which had been repaired. The board just after it, the one that creaked slightly when weight shifted toward the door. She had learned the sound of it over the past weeks without meaning to. The door did not open immediately. She stood with the boots in her hands and her eyes on the table, and she waited without deciding to wait, because her feet did not move and she did not tell them to. Then the latch lifted. The light from outside came in first, the long angle of late afternoon, the kind that turns dust in the air to something almost visible, and then he stepped through the doorway and stopped. He had something in his hand. She saw it before she saw his face. A small bundle wrapped in brown paper tied with twine. He held it the way a person holds something they have been carrying a long time and have not yet decided to give. He looked at her. She had not moved. Still standing with the boots, one in each hand, her arms loose at her sides. The light came in around him and lay across the table and across the floor and across her skirt, and she stood in it and did not say anything. He set the bundle on the table. He did not push it toward her, did not gesture at it. He set it down in the way a man sets down a tool he is finished with, except that he did not look away after. She looked at it. Brown paper. The twine was knotted, not tied quickly, but deliberately, the way a man ties something he expects to untie later, and wants the knot to hold in the meantime. She set the boots on the floor. She did not move toward the table. She stayed where she was and looked at the bundle and then looked at him, and he was watching her with his hands now at his sides, his hat already in his hand, and his expression was the one she had come to read as the absence of pretense, not open but honest. The difference mattered. He said, "You were going to leave tonight." It was not a question. She did not answer. He looked at the table, then at her. His jaw moved once, like he was deciding something, and then he said, "You don't have to." The room was very still. She understood that he was not asking her to stay. He was telling her something about the door, that it was there, and that it was hers to use, and that the shape of his life would continue past this moment regardless. He was telling her this so that what came next would not be something she felt trapped into. She understood all of that. She looked at the bundle on the table. She said, "What is it?" He said, "Something I had made." He paused. "Some time ago," she waited. He said, "You don't have to open it now." She walked to the table. She set her hands on the edge of it and looked at the bundle for a moment, and then she pulled. One end of the twine and the knot came loose the way he had intended it to, slowly, and then all at once the paper fell open. Inside was a small leather case, the kind made for needles and small tools. Her name was stamped into the cover, not the name she'd given him when she arrived. Her full name, the one she hadn't told him. She looked at the case for a long moment. Then she looked at him. He was standing by the window with his hands at his sides and his face arranged the way his face was most days, level, giving nothing away that he had not decided to give. But his jaw had shifted slightly. She had learned that. She knew what it meant. She said, "How did you know?" He said, "Your trunk. The latch has initials worked into the brass. I noticed when I helped carry it up." She said nothing for a moment. He said, "I had no reason to use it before. I used it now." She lifted the case. The leather was soft, not new, but dressed carefully. Her full name across the cover in small, clean letters, the stamp still holding its depth, the way good work holds. She opened it. Inside, each loop and slot was fitted to the tools she carried. The needles she had brought from home, the small bone folder, the awl with the cracked handle she had never replaced. He had measured them, or observed them, or both. She did not ask. She closed the case. She said, "Some time ago." He said, "Yes." She said, "How long?" A pause. The window held gray winter light and the sound of someone's wagon on the frozen street below, he said. "Since November." She set the case on the table. She looked at it there. Then she picked up her coat from the chair and she did not put it on. She held it. She said, "I don't know what you expect from me," he said. "I don't expect anything," she said. "That isn't true." He looked at her then, directly, without the careful distance he usually maintained. He said, "No, it isn't." The wagon outside had passed. The room was very quiet. She set her coat back down on the chair. She said, "I need to think," he said. "All right," she said. "I may need more than a day," he said. "I know." She turned toward the window. Outside, the street was pale, and the rooftops were white, and the smoke from the chimneys went straight up in the cold air because there was no wind. She stood there for a while, and he did not move and did not speak, and the room held them both in it without demanding anything. After a time, she reached out and set one hand flat on the glass. Then she picked up the leather case and carried it to the chair beside the fire and sat down with it in her lap. She did not open it again. She simply held it. He sat down across from her. He did not say anything. She stayed.